Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Hannah Broderud. And today we are recording on location in downtown Chicago.
Woohoo!
We're just coming off of 2 days of no longer virtual conference with Sarah Elkins and our community in the NLV group. And we met our guest just this week, Danny Langloss. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Luke.
Yeah, we are super excited to talk to Danny. Like, he just immediately, it was like 2 hours after the conference began. I think Hannah and Ben and I were like looking at each other like, okay, like, if we think Danny is someone we're going to try and get on the podcast, we're like targeting people. So I'm glad that you said yes.
You're a target.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
No, thank you. It's an absolute honor. And I just was blown away by you two, by your entire team. Your thought on leadership, this discussion around intentionality is so important. We're completely aligned.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And your experiences, I think, just gel so much with what we've been talking about this month. And so as a reminder to listeners, this is month number 1 of our 4th season. And we kicked it off with this conversation about intentional leadership. And just as a reminder, we define it as 3 things. They notice something that could be better in the world. They make an intentional choice about how they're going to engage, what they're going to do to make it better. And then they actually have the courage to follow through and do it. And there is a download, magicintheroom.com, and it's going to walk you through that intentional leadership model, have some reflection questions. And our encouragement this season is just like, do the downloads, think about it, follow along with us. And we really believe that learning comes from reflection. And so invest in yourself and take the time to reflect. So we'll remind you at the end again, and let's get into it. So Danny, give us your background. We're not going to read your bio. So tell listeners who you are, a little bit of your story. I know you're passionate about leadership, and what were some moments that led you to that passion?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear first, what do you do today and kind of what led up to that?
Yeah, so I'm currently the city manager in Dixon, Illinois. It's a town of 16,000 people. We've got a team of 103 team members. We're in Northwest Illinois, about 90 miles due west of Chicago. And then in addition to that, I'm a keynote speaker on leadership, on a topic I talk about, ownership, and then empathy, which I think is the heartbeat of leadership. So ever since I was 8 or 9 years old, I knew that I wanted to be a police officer. I don't know what it was about the officers in uniform. You're taught that they're there to protect you, to help you, to be there for you when you need them. You see them in the squad car. And so I fulfilled that dream when I was 21 years old, got hired at the Dixon Police Department. And, I didn't have my mind on leadership or investigations, or I just wanted to be in a patrol car out serving the community, helping protect people, make people safe. And there are a couple different moments in my career where I caught some breaks. One was when one of our detectives, because the detective division is where kind of the stars in the department were. Like, I looked up to these people. They were mentors, role models, and it was going to be tied up for quite a while. So it's 3 years into my career, and we've got this flag football team on Sundays. And one of the detectives tore a tendon in his finger grabbing a flag. And so he was out. And so I got tapped on the shoulder to go back, told this is very temporary, and then caught a couple more opportunities with some big cases. And so they made room for me.
Wow.
And part of that, and we'll talk about later, was my ability to connect with people and to get to the truth. And so at 5 years, we had a lot of transitioning happening. We had a lot of older leadership, older sergeants that were retiring out with 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
And at 5 years, I got this opportunity, tested, became sergeant. And then at 33 years old, 12 years into my career, I was fortunate enough to be selected to serve as the police chief. And so there was a lot of trials and tribulations at the beginning of that we can get into later if you want to. But during my tenure as police chief in 2012, a friend of mine from the FBI came to see me, and the FBI had just raided City Hall. and they arrested our comptroller, Rita Crunwell, for embezzling $54 million over a 20-year period. And so because of several, I was initially asked to be on a leadership team, and then some other things happened and some fallout happened. And then I was asked to step into essentially the city manager role, which we didn't have at the time, and help lead us back, create the right team, professionalize every aspect of city government. And I did that. And then I couldn't wait to get back to be the police chief. And then I always say individuals, organizations, and communities rise and fall with leadership. And the next, the kind of the interim city manager, he was a good guy. He was a facilitator, a coordinator, just a good person. But the new council that came in when the old council got unelected, essentially, and a great group of people. It's an unfortunate situation. So they hired their own person, and man, like the culture, like low trust, high micromanagement, power and control, like explosiveness. It was just a terrible environment to work in. I think when we think about intentionality, I think he was trying to ruin everybody's day every day this person came to work. And so I was looking for other jobs and considering leaving, and I was having council members and some of the staff say, Danny, when you were this position before, things went well. Like you cared about us, you showed up at our workplace, you let us do our job, you trusted us, like, step back into this role. And so that's how I ended up as the city manager. And I've been in this role now for a little bit over 6 years. So that's kind of try to surmise as quick as I can some of my journey.
No, I love it. And when I hear that story, I just think about the diversity of all the contexts that you've had to lead in. When I compare and contrast, and I could be way off, but in my mind, I think about a police force as being relatively command and control, higher power distance between leaders and subordinates, really clear lines, code of conduct, procedural. And then when I think about managing a city or that city manager role, I think about all of these stakeholders that are being wrangled with soft power, right? When I think about, there's all the residents, and there's a city council, and there's the parks department, and there's the police department, and there's the chamber of commerce, and there's the state that you're probably interfacing with. I think about all of those, and I think, well, that's a very different context. So I'm curious, like, am I right? Am I wrong? Like, tell me about those different structures that you've been inside.
So you're right. The traditional policing organization is hierarchical in nature, and coming up through the ranks for the first probably, 6, 7, 8 years, it was policy, rules. I remember being called into the chief's office because I had an unauthorized drinking vessel in the car. There were normally supposed to be 4 people on day shift. There were only 2. And at lunchtime, we went and sat because the school had open campus. The high school did, so they could leave for lunch.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have my authorized drinking vessel, a Dare mug, and had got a soda, a Diet Coke, and I was sitting there drinking it, and the chief apparently drove by and saw me.
Wow.
And so I ended up in my office being yelled and screamed at and told how I better never do that again. But, a transition happened with the next chief, and that chief was actually a good guy, but he was military, and he thought that's how he was supposed to lead. We had a great relationship, but that was just how he thought he was supposed to lead. Like, he didn't think you could have a friend, and he had to keep this distance and this boundary.
Yeah.
And so I would say traditionally that's right. Now, my belief and my values and the way I lead doesn't align with that at all. So the way that you envision maybe a city manager operating and being more collaborative and building trust and delegating and having these relationships, right? And really unifying everybody. Like that's how I've always led. That's what I believe in.
Yeah.
And so, when I came in to police chief, we had a very fractured and divided culture. In fact, I'll tell this really quick story, and then that'll set this up. So when I was asked what are the greatest problems facing the Dixon Police Department, I said, imagine this scenario. It's Game 7 of the World Series. It's the bottom of the 9th. The game is tied. The bases are loaded. There's 1 out, and you step up to bat. The guy in the on-deck circle is hoping you strike out so he can get the game-winning hit. That was the problem with the Dixon Police Department.
Yeah.
And so after it got announced that I was going to be the police chief, and this was announced in January. I wouldn't take over until June, so I'd have time to work with the chief. the mayor at the time, who I later became great friends with through the Cromwell embezzlement, and he said some of the nicest things anybody's ever said about me, came out against me publicly.
Huh.
There was community outcry. So our local newspaper had a website, and you could comment anonymously. So I've got these 6 pages of really negative. Like, one of the things was I was from the Sicilian mob out of Chicago. Like, it was just, and I'm sure it was like 3 or 4 people that were aligned with somebody else that they thought should get the job. And then I faced a vote of no confidence that narrowly failed 13 to 12.
Wow.
And so that was the issue and problem. And so my main strategy, being very intentional about the strategy that I was going to use, was to give everybody on the department a voice.
Mm.
And so I held one-on-one listening sessions, and I'd hope to get 20 or 30 minutes. And a couple of people kind of laughed, and they said, oh, nobody's going to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you what I heard during those conversations, first and foremost, was nobody has ever cared what I had to say. Nobody ever bothered to ask how this impacted me, right? Like, I love the department, and we've got a lot of good equipment, and we got good people here and stuff, but you just didn't feel seen. You didn't have a voice. And so this was the first time anybody ever empowered somebody else to talk and share their ideas.
So it sounds like they did want to talk to you after all.
There wasn't a conversation that lasted less than 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And most lasted 3.5 hours.
Wow.
And so we took that information, implemented a whole bunch of strategies, and within a few months, that culture went from toxic to healthy, positive, and in a culture that really had a lot of innovation, commitment, respect, teamwork, collaboration. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I love that. So let's dive into that a little bit. How do you create that kind of culture? Because that's a big ongoing conversation here on our podcast and within our team and the teams that we serve and help to lead, right? So what are some of the components that go into creating a healthy culture?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I've created a framework. It's called the 7 pillars of ownership. And so ownership is the extreme emotional and psychological connection to the team, to the vision, goals, the organization as a whole, where people are doing things because it's important to them, not because they're told to do so. Now, this isn't the kind of ownership that's territorial and that's jealous and that hold things tight to them, right? This is the kind of ownership that you see out of great leaders that really that trust the people around them and are collaborative and inclusive. And so the 7 pillars are: pillar 1 is psychological safety. Pillar 2 is sense of belonging. Pillar 3 is aligning purpose. Pillar 4 is confidence. Pillar 5 is empowerment. Pillar 6 is innovation. And pillar 7 is commitment. And very high levels of commitment transition to ownership.
Okay, so let's get practical, because I love those pillars, and I love the idea that you sat down and actually listened to people. But to build that culture where people felt those things and experienced those pillars, I know it was more than just a one-time sit down. So what practices, what recurring cadences, like what did you practically do to cause them to trust that things were different now?
So I think the big thing was that not only did people feel heard and seen and valued and supported and appreciated and understood, right? Because I think those are 7 things that every person needs. We took all that information that we collected. They remained confidential in what they shared. And to this day remain confidential individually what they shared. And we put together a list and categories of the problems. And then we took action to fix those problems. One of the big issues that we had was we had a disjointed and dysfunctional leadership team at the top. The chief and the lieutenants weren't on the same page. 2 camps were developed. We'd gone from a traditional policing, arrest, to community policing. There wasn't buy-in. We were intentional about creating our brand and trust with the community. So we had reporters going on drug raids and things with us, which people in a more traditional mindset didn't like. And so one of the big problems was nobody knew which side to choose, because one of the lieutenants was viewed to be the next chief, like the automatic heir to the throne, and would have been. But so people are like, do I follow the current chief, knowing he's only got a couple more years? And so one voice leadership was huge.
Yeah.
So one voice leadership was a big thing. We got really clear on our values. We got really clear on our vision. Our vision was to create a safer Dixon, right? That was our vision. And then we got clear on our three goals. Our three goals were exemplary citizen service, proactive policing strategies, and then community policing initiatives. It's been a while since I worked through that in my head.
Yeah.
So we got really clear on that. And then after everybody had shared individually, we brought people together for a department meeting, and the lieutenants who'd been disjointed had bought in by this point because of an expectation and a gun line that had been sent, but because of real meaningful conversations and connecting on a very human level with them. Everybody understands there's a lot of turmoil when a big position like that comes up, and things happen, and that's fine. Yeah. So you got to put that behind you. And so at this department meeting, the three of us presented. We talked about what the issues and the problems were. We talked about the solutions, and then we said the number one goal of our administration is going to be morale. Now, we use the word morale because that creates a certain feeling, but the number one goal was employee engagement.
Yeah.
And what later I found to be the X factor of winning cultures and championship teams, and that's ownership. And so as we looked, like one of the big struggles is that there was a lot of jealousy, backstabbing, envy. There was a lot of favoritism. Like if in that favoritism was somewhat fair, but somewhat unfair, because, the chief failed to hold lines of accountability, the prior chief did. And so he just turned to people and went around people. Well, that came across as favoritism, but the people who bought into the direction of the organization were involved and included more. They had more of a voice. And so we had to really address those things. So the first thing was, how do we be seen as one team?
Right.
And so what I decided to do, leading up to this point, letters of accommodation would go out to individuals. And it seemed like the same individuals were getting them all the time. Well, being part of a team, right, yourselves, that, somebody might have got the confession, but who did the neighborhood canvas, who identified the car, who went out and got all the video from Walmart when this vehicle was out around, there was a lot of things that went into solving the murder, right? Sure. And so what we did, we said, we're only going to recognize things in team ways.
Okay.
And so we, on a big event that deserved a letter of recognition, what we did was we put everybody's name that deserved it in the letter, and then we posted that, and then we highlighted special things within it. So that was the one strategy. The other strategy was that our supervisors had to use the word team with their teams a minimum of 6 times a day. And it didn't take long. Actually, the power of one word, this using the word team, the next thing you know, everybody in the organization is saying the word team when they're describing things that happen. And that was a major, major shift.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Sorry, that's a lot.
I love it. And I just want to break down for people listening, like, don't miss the fact that what Danny just walked us through is exactly what your organization needs. Like the things that he mentioned, it's a blueprint for high performance. So I'm going to give you a recap, but do not be afraid to rewind and listen to that thing, put this thing on favorite, whatever. So role clarity. What does it mean to be a leader here? Do we have a leadership team or not? Data around current state and capturing information from our team members about what they believe is going well and not going well. And that can look a lot of different ways, right? But we capture data and we feed it back and are honest with everyone. Here's what you said. Here's what we're going to do. Goal of employee engagement. We know, like at this point in history, the science is super clear. Employee engagement equals organizational performance. So if you're trying to get performance without going the route of employee engagement, you are not being very efficient. And then the last thing that you talked about, this recognition, like if we recognize things that are aligned with our values and our strategy, it reinforces the values and strategy. And ownership as well. People can only take ownership of something that's clear. So if we have it clearly said, this is our goal for this year, a safer Dixon, here's what that means, bam, bam, bam. If not everyone has that memorized, they can't take ownership of it and they can't change their behavior to align with it. So love it, love it, love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Before we jump into the city manager stuff, which is super interesting, I want to kind of go a level deeper. This is a little bit of a, look forward into next month, but next month we're going to talk about how our personality that's unique to us and our life experiences shape how we show up as leaders. And I'm really curious from your story. You said you became a police officer at 21. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
And worked your way up, had this opportunity to become chief. So what I hear is that your whole professional, career had been in a context that was different than your leadership style, or at least the leadership style that emerged
At
as
least
you.
the traditional way
Right.
of doing that thing was different from your current
Right.
leadership style philosophy.
So I think it's safe to expect that someone who has been a cop since they're 21 and grown up in the same organization and then gets a chance to lead, like they only know one way to lead, but you didn't. There was something different. So tell me, is it just in your genetics and the way you see the world? Is it, I read this book and it changed everything? Like my mom always said this to me. Like, what is it that made you the leader that you are just intuitively?
So I think people are born with qualities that lend themselves to leadership. But I think it's our experiences very early in our life that shape some things that are really important. And one of those things is the ability and the capacity for empathy and compassion. Mm-hmm. And so having just a very loving childhood, having a mom who I say taught me how to love, yeah, and a dad who was a great leader, a great communicator, very strategic, very resilient. And the story about, where he came from growing up in the projects of Peoria, which is a rough area, losing his mom at 15. His dad was an alcoholic. All of those different things and experiences go into it. But I had the police department was phenomenal on equipment and they were phenomenal on training. Uh-huh. And I love to learn. And so I was able very early in my career to get exposed to some really great experts in the leadership space. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I wasn't listening to judge what fit and what I believed in. I was just listening with curiosity and taking it all in. And then I believe, I had a couple of amazing role models, Lieutenant Harry Olferts, who passed a few years ago, and Gary Capitelli, who was the chief before me. I learned so much from the bad leaders, the dinosaur leaders. And it's funny because there's one leader in particular, Sergeant Terry Mattis, and I only say his name in the positive because he was before his time, and he did not get the respect he deserved. Mm-hmm. All these other sergeants that I was working for, and they were really good people. Not each of them, but a few that I work with drove a lot of negative emotion in me.
Yeah.
Right? Power and control. Like, I have the ability to impose my will on you for this. Like, we're not interested in your opinion. And so
you're drinking out of the wrong cup.
You're drinking out of the wrong cup, right? You pulled a blind down after a prisoner fought you and it was 4 a.m. and you guys forgot to put it back up. That's another reason I was in the office getting yelled at. And but at any rate, my whole point of talking about this is I learned more from bad leaders.
Yeah.
And bosses. They weren't leaders. They were good people. But I remember constantly saying, I'm not going to do that. I'll never do that. I'll never do this. I'll never do that. And then combine that with Harry Olferts and Gary Capitelli, and a lot of what I learned about how you treat people and go the extra mile for people and our standard and this, what I call a commitment to excellence.
Yeah.
Especially out of Harry Olferts on that. And then Gary being the visionary he was, like it just kind of all came together and made me the person I was. But I think a lot of the negative experiences and the stamp those emotions left on me just really solidified the values and the way that I began to lead.
Yeah. So I want to pick up on a couple things that I heard. One is this idea of strength, and in a later month, we're going to talk about strengths as part of, what influences our leadership, right, as intentional leaders. And I believe that, and we've talked about strengths during the conference this week as well, right? So I believe strengths are at the intersection of talent and skill, right? So I agree with you that I think there are people that are born with talent, areas of natural talent that lend themselves to leadership on the one hand. On the other hand, there are specific skills that you can learn to become a better leader, right? And as we all know from sports, for example, if you combine talent with skill, you get exceptional performance. Talent, I'm a fan of saying that, talent, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. So you can work hard on building leadership skill. And I think everyone can be a leader and everyone can improve their skill. Some people aren't born with natural talent, but not everyone has the opportunity to tap into that latent talent early on to be able to build the skill that lead to, excellent levels of performance. Some of us discover some of our talents later in life, right? And you can still tap into them. But what I heard there was that you had some areas of talent, you had opportunity early on to build skill within that level of talent, and you drew on those strengths. So that was the first point that I heard. The other one was this idea of compassion, love, and belonging. You mentioned in your framework, you have psychological safety, and you also have, how did you phrase it? Belonging or love?
Sense of belonging.
Sense of belonging.
Aligning
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah, which is really those social needs that we have as humans to feel seen, heard, valued. And we had some conversation around that during the conference of, many of us have heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they are true human needs that we have, right? And Maslow didn't necessarily create the hierarchy of those needs. He identified the different needs, right? And then others came in and organized them into a hierarchy. And the case could be made that those social needs for connection, belonging, love are central to the human experience and quite possibly come even before our physical and physiological needs. Because, I know you have a young son who's 19 months old, I believe, Theo.
Yep, Theo.
Yeah. You know that without you and your wife really caring for Theo's needs, making sure that he got fed, that he was warm, that he had shelter, he wouldn't be able to survive on his own. And I think that's such a powerful analogy because every one of us started out dependent on another human being to care enough for us to make sure we got our needs met. And that need, that desire never goes away. As much as we try to convince ourselves that we're an island, we don't need anybody, we're strong, we're resilient on our own, we don't need anyone. Many of us have gone through those phases of our lives where we're like, I'm going to tough it out on my own. We're hardwired for connection, for belonging, for love. And we're going to have Renee Smith on a future episode of our podcast too, talks about the business case for love, the business case for love in organizations. She came from government and kind of similar evolution, right? A different way of leading that leads with empathy, connection, belonging, and love. So I just appreciated hearing that from you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and Renee's work is phenomenal. The one thing I want to make sure, because you talk about, the intersect of skill and talent. I've had a lot of challenge and adversity through my career. Before that break I got going into investigations, the first 2 years I was with the department, I was third from the bottom in evaluations. I was really frustrated. I knew I didn't belong there. I got passed up for a position just before 3 years to get involved with SWAT. And I'd been told that me and another guy with the same amount of time on were both getting on the team, and they didn't even bother to tell me. I saw it and so I was frustrated, and Gary Capitelli saw my frustration and he called me in, and I was getting ready to leave because if I don't feel like I've got opportunity or a fairness or a justice side, then I'm going to do something else, right? And he says, Danny, my boy, it's all a perception thing. And this was a huge learning moment for me. He said, the problem is that this older generation of sergeants is intimidated by you.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of energy and you're very active, and it's been off-putting to them. And this is just a perception issue. They don't see what I see.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I tell you what I want you to do. He said, I want you to go talk to each of them individually. Tell them I'm struggling. I'm at the bottom of the evaluation list. Will you help me get better? Because I want to do a really good job here. And he said, I would almost guarantee you that not one of them will give you actual constructive feedback, but everything will change. And I went and did these listening session really, and went and asked for help.
Sure.
And nobody gave me a single suggestion. And I went from being third from the bottom of evaluations to number one, and I was never less than number one again until I became police chief, right?
Yeah.
But the one lesson I did learn from my time with Gary was it's so important to come in Stephen Covey's Fifth Habit of seek first to understand, then be understood.
Yeah.
And like I was trying so hard to show that I was competent, that I could contribute, that I was valuable, that it was a put off. It was a big put off. And I learned that there's one area in life that the harder you try, the worse you can make it. And that's in relationships.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to kind of share that because that happened before then.
Yeah.
And some of these lessons.
And I love that too, because there is this perception out there that if I ask for help, I'm going to be perceived as weak. If I ask for feedback, I'm going to be seen as less than competent. And there's been research to actually show that the opposite is true, right? When we ask for help and when we ask for feedback, and leaders, especially who ask for feedback, tend to have higher trust, and people actually see them, because it takes courage to be vulnerable and to ask for help and to admit that we're not perfect. And when we do that, it builds trust with people, and it actually helps the perception of the person who is asking for the feedback. So I thought that was a really great example of seeing that in action.
It's a tremendous trust accelerator.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's keep pulling the thread on, because so far you've shared a couple examples around using vulnerability, creating empathetic relationships with others to succeed. One's the turnaround of the department, or maybe turnaround's too strong. I'll say it. You didn't say it. By asking people for feedback, doing the listening sessions. Another example in your personal career that you just shared around building that empathetic relationship. I know another story you have is around maybe similar theme, but different context, where using a human relationship to connect with a suspect. So do you mind sharing that story and maybe your takeaways from that?
Yeah, absolutely, Luke. And I've really enjoyed the conversations we've had about that as this idea continues to evolve in my mind. I just recently prepared to do a 4-hour interrogation class with the police academy, the new recruits, which was a ton of fun. And I'd done a lot of reflecting after hearing Heather Younger speak about the art of active listening.
Yeah.
And when I went back to do some research on active listening, I was going through I'm trained as an FBI crisis hostage negotiator. I didn't work for the FBI, but I went through their model and a few others. And as I was going through...
You're a badass.
I don't know, definitely not.
You don't have to say it. We'll say it for you.
Here's the thing, right? Like, I need to be really good with my words because I am not tough. And so I'm going through, flipping through this book to get to the active listening, and I come across the FBI behavioral change model. And so with the FBI behavioral change model, you have the undesired incident. So you have a hostage taker. You have somebody that just committed a violent crime that you're trying to arrest that's held up in a house, armed, maybe shooting at the police, or just, if you come in, I'll hurt you. Or you have somebody in mental psychological distress that's thinking about harming themselves and has the means. And so so that's the undesired behavior. So the first step in the behavioral stairway model is empathy. The second's rapport. The third is influence.
Yeah.
And after you have influence, you're able to create the behavior change. The hostage taker lets the hostage go. The armed suspect that committed the crime surrenders peacefully and comes out, right? The person who's talking about, committing suicide allows you to help them. And this is all fueled by active listening, the secret sauce and the secret weapon to unleash all of these things over really very short periods of time. You know, in comparison, we think about relationships. So you've got this model with hostage crisis negotiation. Then you switch over to interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
And so interrogation, one of the things that's most important when you're sitting across from a murder suspect or a pedophile or somebody that's committed a serious crime is the ability to establish rapport with them and do that very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so on September 11th, 2009, at 12:46 p.m., we got a call that just from the call sent chills through our spine. And the call went something like this, you know, Southside Squad, Lee County, you know, go ahead, you know, please meet with Dave at the Dollar Tree. He went out to put some garbage into the dumpster, and there's a purse in there. And when he went through the purse, cell phone, wallet, and money are all still in there. Why? I mean, if somebody was stealing somebody's purse, at least the money would be taken.
Right.
And so right away we're like, oh no, something must be wrong. And for the purpose of time in this conversation, I'm going to accelerate. So we get permission from Margaret, who the purse belonged to, her husband, to go into the house. And we went into the house, we went upstairs, we found her dead.
Wow.
In her bedroom. And so we began to work this case in the investigation. It led us to a suspect named Byron Adams. And so we had a circumstantial case. We didn't have DNA. We didn't have a witness see him going in and out of the house. We had zero communication between him and Margaret to create a nexus. But we had video of the vehicle that we believed he was in, dumping the purse in the Walmart complex. We had a person in the neighborhood say they saw his vehicle parked behind their house. We had iPass records showing toll violations from Chicago out and back in this time frame. We had him going into Walmart on video. But back in 2009, that video wasn't great. And he was saying that it wasn't him. It didn't even look like him. So on day one, we took a really solid traditional interrogation model. And so we had two of our investigators in doing this interrogation, and they tried to build a little rapport, but, you know, really not near enough in hindsight, right? They were running the interrogation model, and then they really did a heavy evidence-based with his car was seen. We've got him on camera, and they I don't know how many times they showed him the picture. He said, that's not me. That don't even look like me. And so he was very defiant. Every time they challenged him, he pushed back. And so he faked a heart attack about 6-7 hours into this thing. And so the next day we said, when he comes out, we're going to have a new strategy. And so as the police chief, normally I'm not the one, I'm the coach, not the player, right? I've got this reminder in our critical incident book. But a couple people came to me and they're like, Danny, you've got to get in this interview room because interrogation is what I was absolutely best at.
Right.
And so I picked a guy from another department who I'd done several interrogations with, and we had a 100% confession rate. So I picked a guy from outside of our department and then decided, okay, so we communicated this to our team. It wasn't super popular, but we stepped in and we shifted to the empathy, rapport, influence. We stopped asking any questions about the crime, about any relationship with Margaret. And we decided that we were going to, he's scared to death, right?
Yeah.
Like he's institutionalized, been in and out of prison several times, various serious crimes, grew up in the inner city of Chicago, was one of 17 kids, has never confessed to the police. So he was having fun messing with us, huge narcissist. And so what we decided to do was understand, like he's sitting down in this hole, and Brene Brown talks about empathy not being grabbing somebody and pulling them out, but crawling down in with them.
Yeah.
And when we did, and when we listened, what happened, just like those one-on-one listening sessions, was he gave us the roadmap to be able to get to the truth.
Wow.
And so through this conversation, this roadmap, we found out, he'd never helped or talked to the police, but while in prison, this prison guard that treated him better than anybody had ever treated him, and who was a family man, got shanked, and he was the only witness, and he came forward as state's evidence. And then he was having an affair with a woman that he was deeply in love with and cared about, and that was kind of rocky. And then in addition to that, he was a narcissist. He was a player. He called it, he's out dealing. He's at the lounge. He's, great at poker and craps. So we really fed into his ego.
Yeah.
And then we did some things, right? So when you think about trust and likability, proximity, duration, and intensity are three things that if you can create, you can establish high levels of rapport and this feeling of trust with people, and you become more likable.
Yeah.
And so you add those three things on to finding out like what his favorite meals were and ordering them in and eating them with him over the next few days. And then we had to create a strategy that was implausible based on the evidence, but that made him think he would have a way out. And so we did that, and he bid on it. And then he gave a full confession. And we held things back. Somebody might be listening saying, well, yeah, you interrogated him for 22 hours over 3 days. Of course, but no, we held things back that only the murderer knew. Like, he said that he'd put something over her head, put something in her mouth, and tied her up. Well, we said that. And when he left, he didn't think there's any chance that she could be harmed or that she'd die. Well, he bid on that, but she had 3 socks rolled up, stuffed into her mouth, a pillowcase over her head that was wrenched so tight it had to be cut off. And then she was tied up by this, I think it's a blue cloth thing. So he ended up going over this, and then we brought the evidence in and say, help us understand how it fits this. Byron, you said it was this, but how does it fit this?
Yeah.
And then he's the one, before we showed him, that said it was a pillowcase, that said he put the socks in her mouth and told us what he tied her hands up with. So we were very intentional about protecting that confession. So I wanted to share that as we tie that to a bow. But so this concept I'm working on right now called extreme influence. So if you're able to connect with a sociopath and establish these high levels of rapport, right? This feeling of trust and credibility. If you can get the roadmap through active listening, right? And all the elements of that and empathy and crawling down that space with them, just think about the kinds of relationships that we can build with our team members.
Yeah.
If what we're doing is based in genuine care and concern, authenticity, right? Because you care and love the people that you work with.
Yeah.
And so when you take these skills and employ them as a leader, when you employ empathy and compassion, right? When you understand how to build very high levels of rapport, when you care about people holistically, when you lead the whole person and they're not a means to the end, they're not an object that gets you what you want, the level of relationships and loyalty and dedication and commitment and ownership that comes from that, the way it makes people feel like they belong, and the psychological safety and the empowerment and the confidence side of that.
Yeah.
We prime them for innovation. We prime our environment for teamwork and collaboration.
Yeah.
And by just taking the time and caring and being intentional about using these strategies and these concepts because you care about somebody, right? And you want to do the service of what leadership really is, it really just, it changes everything.
Yeah.
So I'll shut up now. What do you got on that?
There's so much, and this has been such a really interesting and rewarding conversation. And I feel like we could go on talking for hours. I'd love to just kind of start to wrap up by let's kind of wrap up some final thoughts or key takeaways that we've had, because there's a lot to digest in this episode. Luke, where's your head at right now?
Yeah. So just to be honest, I mean, I'm still processing the story, but the thing that comes to mind is if you can use empathy and create rapport to influence someone that, I'm sure on some level your skin crawls being in the room with them, looking at the photos of what they did, all of that. I'm just thinking about surely leaders who are listening, and surely I can use empathy and build rapport whenever I'm trying to influence people. Because most people that I'm trying to influence, I mean, when I think about clients that we work with or partners that we have, I like them, right? But oftentimes I get caught into showing the evidence. I'm just going to waterboard someone with evidence and say, well, isn't this, look at this trend, look at this data point, look at this financial result, look at this score on a survey. Surely, isn't it obvious that we have to go with this strategy? And people are like, no, it's not obvious. I don't want to do that. Right. And I'm surprised somehow that they're like, well, come on, guys. Like, didn't I show you all the evidence of why we should go down this path? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, Luke, like you have so much to learn. What if I just connect with them and learn what they need? And yeah, there's a ton of evidence that then I can use in a smart way to get us all where we need to go. So I don't know. I'm going to be thinking about this for a while.
Well, you tapped into, I think it's leadership excellence law number 6, and it's people support what they create.
Yeah.
And so, the reason coaching is so important in leadership is because if you come in and I just tell you what to do or solve your problem for you or tell you what I think, you walk out of there with something that I own, something that I created. There's no pride for you in that. You go, it's transactional. But if I sit and I ask you questions and I help pull out of you the solution, even if I reframe or give multiple options, the fact that you chose to do that, you now own that.
Yeah.
Right. And now there's a shift. And so there's a level of pride you take as you execute that. And now are you not only equipped to solve this exact situation, now you're equipped to solve several other situations, all with now what you believe and you own.
Yeah.
Well, that's powerful. I just keep circling back to this, how do we create trust? How do we create a culture, a high trust culture and high trust relationships, right? That's really the goal in all of these different kind of methods, strategies, like intentional ways to be intentional as a leader, right? We want high trust because it speeds up the outcome that we can have, whether it's a one-on-one conversation, a hostage negotiation, building a high-performing team culture, right? It starts with trust, and we build trust by really connecting with the individual and what's important to them, helping them feel seen, heard, valued, meeting those basic human needs. And so really appreciate the light that you've kind of shed on that and your passion in leadership, and really appreciate getting to know you.
And you know what we haven't talked about is what you're doing now with speaking and helping other organizations. What's this new chapter that you're embarking on? And tell us a little bit about where you see yourself going.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. I just tie things in a bow with something around trust. We believe trust is the currency of leadership, and we won't dive into all the things that build trust, but one of them is accountability. So I think there's 5 key aspects of leadership: vision, culture, strategy, execution, and accountability. Without accountability, everything falls apart. And when we love our people the way we talk about and building those relationships, they give us permission to give them feedback, performance feedback, and even discipline if the situation warrants itself. And the issue with the Dixon Police Department back in the day was there was no accountability. And so I just want to tie that piece together around trust, and the fact that this isn't just, leadership excellence law number 11 is people respect what's hard.
Yeah.
So thanks for allowing me to just kind of wrap and tie that up there.
Yeah.
Because it isn't all just about soft, touchy-feely, right? These are the smart things that we can do because we care about where we're going and what it is we're trying to create.
100%.
And they're so powerful. The obstacles, the mountains we can climb, the obstacles we can overcome, it's what makes the impossible possible. And we've just so many examples of that. So, my passion, I talked about wanting to be a police officer ever since I was 8 or 9 years old. And what I found is that my passion my purpose wasn't necessarily policing, right? It was the ability to positively impact other people.
Yeah.
And to be in a position where I could create the greatest impact for other people in areas that I'm passionate about, and the ability to become a multiplier and help others do the same.
Yeah.
And so really what I was drawn to is what I know and understand to be leadership. And so I do keynote speaking, I do consulting where I go in and kind of take an investigative approach to figure out exactly what the issues and problems are in organizations and help create custom programs to fix that. And I do a little bit of one-on-one coaching, but not a lot. My main platform where I'm at all the time is LinkedIn.
Okay.
We built a community, the Community of Leadership Excellence. It's under Danny Langloss of over 45,000 people now. And then my website as well, DannyLangloss.com. If people want to see more about what it is we do, or speaker video, or learn more about the workshops or keynotes, that's the best places for people to find me.
Awesome.
That's awesome. And we'll put those links in the show notes. So if you want to find Danny, check out the show notes and you can click through and get connected with him and his community. And I just highly recommend it.
Yeah.
It's been great
Thank
getting to know you the last couple of days. Just a few reminders. So we are going to go next month into our next part of Leadership Essentials. But a reminder for this month, if you haven't yet downloaded the Guide to Intentional Leadership, you can do that at Magic in the Room. Again, encourage you to reflect there. It'll walk you through the model, give you some questions as you think about how do you want to influence people and how do you want to be intentional about doing that. You can also find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. We're also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. So check us out there. And we're really looking forward to seeing everyone next time.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Provins, Hannah Broderud, and Luke Freeman. It is produced by Ben West. Social media support is by Emma Holland and Michael Manfredi. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. You can find his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded on site in downtown Chicago during the No Longer Virtual conference. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find previous episodes at magicintheroom.com.